I'd like to take up this dilemma that we walked ourselves into, which is that by classifying, by being able to describe the differences and order and structure things and phenomena around us, we are able to create sciences, technologies. We can establish an order that suits human needs. We can make a planet that is particularly aimed at meeting our needs. So that's apparently on the good side, right? We have accomplished great progress in terms of the survival of the human species, which in an evolutionary sense is success, right? We can debate whether we want to accept that definition of success, but it fits a general definition. And at the same time, we see that the order that we impose, the categories and the classifications, prevent us from full connection. We connect only with the parts that we're not filtering out to start with. But also we create hierarchies and we put things in the background according to our interests. And that allows us to enter into these kinds of dynamics and paradigms of extraction, of domination, and finally of destruction. And so we have this argument when people talk about the extinction of species, where they try to give this argument why it's important that we try to conserve species that are endangered, not because they are a manifestation of life here on the planet with us, but because someday we might discover a medicinal use for them, or they might play a part in the ecosystem that is necessary, downstream to meet some human aims. Right? We have this way in which our schemes of classification instrumentalize or transactionalize everything that's not immediately serving our needs. And so we have these two concerns. We want to connect. We want to be able to flow and to have a wholesome context in order for us to be wholesome. And at the same time, we have all of the effects and all of the impetus of the system of classification and of the extractionist mode of being that has yielded all the comforts that we have in life. And so for many of us, in thinking about the kinds of changes that we would need to make to have a very different impact on the planet, there's this complicated, what one climate psychologist calls double bind, where on the one hand, we are drawing comfort and security, right, and pleasures and material goods from one mode of being that give us security and comfort. And when we think about having to give them up, we become insecure and anxious. And yet we know that if we continue to use them, we are moving towards a world that will be nothing but insecurity and anxiety, right? With very severe climate crisis, if we don't do something about it. And so we have all of these complicated places that the climate and ecological crisis puts us when we are approaching it through the old ways of thinking and being, where human interests are the criteria for deciding what species deserve to be conserved. And well, we really do need new, habitats to be converted to human use because of population growth and whatever other human-centered argument we can come to implement. And at the same time, we have this recognition, I think anyone who's here listening has this recognition that we are contributing to a crisis, a human, created, human-powered acceleration of changes that are taking us towards this cliff that we want to do something about. And we're not entirely sure what's being asked of us, but we want to be able to sustain the commitment because it is a long-term action. And we want to be able to do this work and to face this work without being overwhelmed by anxiety, without having our flight impulses kick in and just not being able to think or talk about it any longer. And so the proposal that I've had running in the background is that by looking at teachings on interdependence, and especially thinking about what are the affective states that correspond to interdependence, that are consistent with it. What are the values, the human, personal, social values that are consistent with interdependence, that we can draw on this as resources? And when we think about interconnectedness, interdependence, the recognition that there is really no essential distinction between self and other, the affective state that we recognize that's the closest to that is either compassion, where our empathy allows us to have that sense of separation dissolve, or love. The experience of looking at an other and having that sense of that other being other really just disappear in that experience. In that moment of love, there's not a self and another. We just are, right? And so knowing that we have this capacity, we're not needing to create something new or import something new from elsewhere. We have the capacities, we have the resources to live in a different way, to think and to relate in a different way. We just have not succeeded in making a world around them. But in our personal commitment, and then in a collective commitment to look at the effects of our way of being and our way of relating and want to do something about them, we have this resource to sustain us. And so thinking about how do we connect beyond the labels and the categories and the differences? And maybe how do we acknowledge, when we talk about kinship, we're not saying everyone is the same, we're all one, there are no differences, right? Kinship recognizes some kin have that place in the family of things, and other kin are different, and so they have another place, but we're all kin. And this brings us to a very kind of fundamental question, which is, how do we as human beings acknowledge and value diversity? How can we see difference and recognize it's not the same as being identical. We are not identical. We're different, but we're not essentially different. We're not different in the sense that we can't connect. How do we acknowledge particular differences without saying because some things are different, we are disconnected or completely separate, right? And another way of thinking about this is, could we have an acknowledgement that there is a self and an other in relative terms? One is oneself and the other is other. Could we have this without having those two be completely separate? And as we saw when we were looking at what happens when we are looking at self and other in these extreme dualistic terms, we end up having one is the center and the other is pushed to the margin. One is important, the other is secondary. And in a certain sense, when we use the term interdependence, some people When I was working on this book that ended up with the title Interconnected, the publisher, we were having some debates about interdependent versus interconnected, and the publisher, I think probably quite rightly, felt people don't want to be dependent. They want to be connected, right? And part of all of the play of self and other is that we are interdependent, and we don't want the dependent part. We might be okay with the inter part, but we would prefer not to be dependent. And so much of the conceptual apparatus and the power dynamics that we see in society have to do with denying dependence, rather than saying we all have some form of dependence. And think about what that means, and think about how to make a world that acknowledges that without having power dynamics or hierarchies. Is that even possible? And that's a question. Could we have kinship without patriarchy? Could there be kin where there's no, dominant patriarchal figure? What would that look like? How could we experience a sense of ourself as being kin to the wild geese, as being kin to the otters, as being kin to the tadpoles, without needing to think about, well, who's superior and whose needs come second? Why does that have to enter in? It actually doesn't have to enter in our encounters. And to come at this from the angle of the philosophical teachings on interdependence, what interdependence is showing us is that interdependence means that we are a condition for our context. We are a condition that affects our environment, and our environment is a condition that affects us, right? In that sense, the context depends on us, and we depend on the context. All of these dependencies are mutual. Different, where we are in those relationships of dependence is different, and it does have an importance, especially socially, where we are within a hierarchy. But no matter where we are within any system, we are interrelated with the rest of the system. And it's really encouraging us to start thinking in terms of systems that are closed, but never completely closed. Every system is embedded within other systems. Okay? Does that make sense? So from the teachings on interdependence, we are saying that there's never one single cause that gives rise to everything else. Every cause is affected and works in collaboration with other conditions. And so we talk about causes and conditions, and we translate terms from Tibetan and Sanskrit as causes and conditions. But if you look at the definitions, the cause is just another condition. It's like the biggest condition or a dominant condition, but it's just a condition. So any phenomenon that we have is the result of the coming together of multiple conditions. Everything is based on diversity. And all of the conditions that will affect any particular event or phenomenon, and the seed is the one that always gets used because it's very easy, and because a lot of us are gardeners, it's kind of maybe, or farmers, it's useful that a seed looks like it's the cause of the tree. But a seed that just sits in the seed packet forever or never comes into contact with soil, with humidity, with a certain amount of heat or light. If a seed doesn't have those conditions, it never becomes a tree. The seed by itself does not become a tree. The seed is one of the conditions. If it's the seed of a tree and not of a plant or a bush, will become that particular tree. And among all of those conditions, as we noticed before, we also need the condition that there's not some other thing. We can plant a seed and we can have all the moisture and we can have everything, but if someone puts a rock on top of our plant, or the dog steps on it in the wrong moment, it doesn't come together. So everything that happens and doesn't happen is dancing together. Could say conspiring, but there's no need for intention. It's just the interplay of conditions that come together to bring about everything. And this is a way of saying that everything depends on everything. In order to have this precise moment in time, all the things that were present in the previous moment needed to be present, and all the things that were absent needed to be absent. And so whatever we're experiencing, other people's experiences are part of that, even if we don't recognize it. And this is also another way that we can start to think about, why do we take one view of how things are, of how things are classified, of how things are connected? We're connected by infinite paths of connection. Why do we trace only those paths and not others? Because of our interests. Because that's food for us, or that's a danger for us. So we focus on all of those things, which activates certain categories and structures, which then guides our interactions. But that's more or less arbitrary. That only is based on our viewpoint and our particular interests. In reality, no single viewpoint within the entire web of things is inherently more valid than others. It may be more relevant to our interests than others, but there's no inherent center and no inherent edges in the web of interdependence. Our ignorance, our self-centrism, where we put self at the center and push other into the margins, or make them in our background, or make it satellites of ourselves, which we've done in astronomy, we do by making the earth the center, we do by making ourselves the center. That's just arbitrary, based on our interestedness, the person who's doing the classification. But that the earth is not at any center, and it's also not at the margin. It's all a question of our perspective. And so the teachings on interdependence start to open up a perspective that, if we thought about living by it, would immediately put into question certain ways of being. Why do we have these hierarchies? Why are certain people at the top and others at the bottom? What sense does that make? Why do we accumulate just for ourselves? As opposed to the values that interdependence would suggest, which is goods are flowing all over the place. Qualities, elements, things are being shared. And that flow of the sharing of things is called life. And what's consistent with that is generosity and not greed. So interdependence itself is suggesting us a way to live. And when we start to open ourselves and we ask, what other qualities, what other modes of being or values does interdependence suggest? We can really apply that question to our life and think, okay, what is the ethics? What is an ethics of interdependence for the situation I am in right now? Is it a set of rules? Is it an attitude of caring? Is it benefiting, being of benefit? What does interdependence suggest to me about where I am and what I'm doing? And one of the issues that we have when we think about interdependence as a philosophy is, again, it's abstract, we've lost the specificity, and it's not, when we talk about it in the philosophical terms, it's not connected to direct experience. And so one suggestion that I want to just kind of put out there is, what if we were thinking about interdependence, through art? What if we let our observation of the natural world teach us about interdependence? Not in words. Not sitting there saying, oh, I notice that the tree is bending with the wind. I think that's teaching me. But connecting through our body and opening ourselves to who's calling to us. Who's announcing to us who we are and where we could place ourselves? Poetry as another avenue to it. And I want to just offer as a poetic image and as a concept also that has appeared in many Mahayana sutras that actually it predates Buddhism, it's mentioned in the Vedas, and it's this concept of Indra's net. And in this concept, it comes from Buddhist cosmology that Indra, who is the Deva, the king of all of the gods, this celestial great being who's sort of, in a theistic position, is holding a net. And his net actually is an alternative to the cosmology that has, a deity at its peak. So in the cosmology, Indra is sitting at the top of Mount Meru, which is in Buddhist cosmology, the center of the world, the highest peak of the world. It's a mountain that is so tall that the level of the sun and the moon only rise to the midway point of this mountain. And at the top of this peak is where we find the heavens. And up there, Indra is holding this net. So this is a very sort of top-down, hierarchical. There's an up and there's a down, and then they're powerful beings and then they're not powerful beings. It's fundamentally a kind of patriarchal structure of the order of beings. But then the idea of Indra's net is that Indra's holding a net. Indra's just a prop who's touching the universe. And the universe exists in this idea in the form of an infinite net where each node is a jewel. So it's a jeweled net. And each jewel at each node reflects all the other jewels of all the other nodes in the entire net. So in any jewel, you can see the grains of sand along the banks of the river in a distant part of the universe. You can see reflected in each node the mother's crying over a lost child. You can see a child being born. You can see a universe coming into being, and you can see a universe going out of being in each node of this net. And I just want to read a brief description from a commentary describing what this means in Buddhist terms. And it says, the manner in which all phenomena interpenetrate is like an imperial net of celestial jewels extending in all directions infinitely without limit. This is known as Indra's net, which is made entirely of jewels. Within each jewel simultaneously is reflected the whole net. Ultimately, nothing comes or goes. If we turn to the southwest, we can pick one particular jewel and examine it closely. This individual jewel can immediately reflect the image of every other jewel. As is the case with this jewel, this is the case with all the rest of the jewels. Each and every one simultaneously and immediately reflects each and every other jewel ad infinitum. When one sits within one jewel, one is simultaneously sitting in all the infinite jewels in all 10 directions. So this is opening up the imagination, asking us to think of things that are not conceptually easy to think. And it's telling us in a poetic way what DNA tells us in a perhaps more banal way, maybe not so banal, that we have been woven together, we are reflecting each other, we are kin in the most profound sense. And so the question that the Indra Jewel teaching leaves us, and where I want to leave us today to reflect, is that if we are all interlinked, and if this is an infinite web that connects us, how do we know and how do we decide what our place is? And wherever our place may be, how do we want to relate to all the other jewels? How do we start to see ourselves in every other jewel? How do we see ourselves in every other being? And how do we see every other being in ourselves? We've been thinking about feeling and living our kinship with all beings. And we start by shifting our focus away from the systems of order that we are constantly imposing on other beings, organizing them into species, into types, and recognizing that the classifications that impose order separate us from things, and that order is based on our objectives and interests. And so we can think about adopting an openness to the interests of other subjects. The countless other subjects with whom we share a world. a world of relatedness where we have a place. And so to think about ways that we can let nature show us our place. Open ourselves to the teachings that this interrelated earth is constantly giving us about interdependence, and about how we belong in the web of kinship of all beings. And as an experiment in taking a different port of entry into that question and into that experience, I'd like to read a poem by Mary Oliver called Wild Geese, which many of you might know already. Let's just open ourselves to these perspectives and experiences and let it do to us what it does to us. And so she says, "You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves." Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. Calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. So let's take a moment to connect with the particular ways that the world calls to us. For Mary Oliver, it's wild geese. What is it that calls us over and over, announcing our place in the family of things?